Sir, could I please have the chicken you didn't finish?" The whole dining room went still. "You did not just beg a guest for scraps. Get to the back, you're fired, you understand me. Your kind doesn't belong in a room like this." "Gerald, take your hand off her." The billionaire set down his fork. "I asked the young lady a question. Why do you want it?" "Because it isn't for me, sir. It's for..." And what Emily Richards said next would shatter Jonathan Whitmore's heart and burn his entire empire to the ground. Stay with me. You'll want to hear her reason. The morning light came thin and gray through the single window of the apartment, the kind of light that never quite warmed anything. Emily moved through the small kitchen on bare feet, careful not to let the floorboards creak because the boy sleeping in the next room needed every hour of rest he could steal. She opened the refrigerator and looked at what was inside it for a long moment, as though looking might change the answer. Half a carton of milk, a jar with 3 pickles floating in cloudy brine, a heel of bread she had been rationing for 2 days. That was the sum of it. She closed the door gently and pressed her forehead against the cool surface. In the bedroom, her brother stirred and called her name, and she fixed her face the way she had learned to fix it, smoothing the worry off it like wiping steam from a mirror before she stepped through the doorway. Noah was turning 15 that very day, though the illness had made him look younger, the way it had thinned his wrists and left dark hollows under his eyes. His kidneys were failing. He was on the transplant list somewhere far down it, and the medicine that kept him steady until his name rose to the top had to be taken on schedule, without gaps, without excuses. There were 2 pills left in the bottle on his nightstand. She had counted them the night before, and counting them again now would not make a third appear. "Did the restaurant pay you?" Noah asked, propping himself up on one elbow. He always asked because he was old enough to understand money and young enough to still believe the answer would be good. "They paid us," Emily said, and the lie came out smooth and warm the way she needed it to. "Everything's handled. Don't you worry about a single thing today, you hear me? Especially not today, birthday boy." A slow smile spread across his face, the first real one she had seen in a week, because he had asked her for one thing and only one thing, and she had promised it to him weeks ago, back when she still believed the wages would come. He wanted the honey-glazed chicken their mother used to make the recipe she had carried in her head and never written down. Their mother had been gone 2 years now. "You promised," he said. "I keep my promises," she told him, and kissed the top of his head and went to get dressed for her shift, because keeping that promise meant working, and working at Maison Celeste meant pretending for 8 hours that the world was fair. She passed the front door on her way out. The notice taped to it had curled at the corners from the humidity, the words "past due" printed across the top in a red that had not faded the way she wished it would. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket as she locked up, and she already knew before she looked that it would be the hospital, a reminder about the appointment she had no way to pay for and would have to move again the way she had moved it twice already. Maison Celeste sat on the best corner of the best block downtown, a building of pale stone and tall windows, where a single dinner cost more than Emily made in a week, or would have made if the restaurant had paid her at all. The name was carved above the door in gold, and most of the people who walked beneath it assumed it belonged to the woman who ran the floor in her gowns and her diamonds. It did not. It had been built 30 years before by a man named Arthur Whitmore, and Arthur had not been born to any of it. He had come up the long way scrubbing other men's kitchens for most of his life, and the restaurant had been the late triumph of a man who had spent decades with nothing. His son had grown up in those lean years in a house every bit as cold as the one Emily had locked behind her that morning, and the restaurant and the fortune that grew out of it had come only later after the boy was already grown. The son had let his wife take the reins of the place. That was the part no one outside the kitchen understood. The part the kitchen understood all too well was this: the paychecks had stopped. Not all at once and not for everyone. They had thinned and slowed and finally dried up for a particular set of people: the dishwashers, the line cooks, the bussers, the cleaners, 19 men and women whose names the customers never learned. Some of them had gone unpaid for months. Amelie was newer than most 3 weeks on the floor, so she was only 2 weeks behind. But 2 weeks was the difference between medicine and no medicine, between rent and that red notice on her door. Nobody said anything because saying anything had a cost. The first cook, who had asked about his missing wages, found his shifts cut to nothing the following week. When one of the cleaners pressed the matter, Gerald, the floor manager, had leaned close and reminded her in a low and pleasant voice how easy it would be to make a call to the immigration office about a few of the people she worked beside. After that, the kitchen learned to keep its grievances behind its teeth. They poured the wine and plated the food and carried out the trays, and they swallowed the rest. That evening, the dining room was full and bright candlelight, catching on crystal the murmur of wealthy conversation rising and falling like water. Jonathan Whitmore sat alone at a corner table. His wife was somewhere among the guests, moving from chair to chair in her gown, and he had ordered without much appetite and eaten less. When Amelie came to clear his plate, 2 pieces of chicken lay on it, untouched, glazed, and golden. The kind of dish that was billed at nearly $40 and was about to be scraped into the bin in the back, the way the kitchen scraped 100 such plates every night. She stood there with the plate in her hands, and she thought of the 2 pills on the nightstand, and the empty refrigerator, and the boy at home who believed her, and something in her that had been holding on by its fingernails simply let go. "Sir," she said, and her voice came out so quiet she barely heard it herself. "Could I please have the chicken you didn't finish?" For a moment, the table and the man at it went very still. Then Gerald was there. He had a way of appearing whenever someone in his employ stepped a half-inch out of line, and he crossed the floor fast, his face already arranging itself into the expression he saved for these occasions. He took Amelie by the arm, not hard enough for the room to gasp, but hard enough that she felt it, and he began to speak the kind of words she had heard before. Words about her kind and where she belonged, and how a girl like her dirtied a place like this just by opening her mouth in it. He told her she was finished. He told her to get herself into the back before she embarrassed the establishment any further. And he was already steering her away from the table when a voice stopped both of them. "Let her go." Jonathan had risen halfway from his chair, one hand resting flat on the white tablecloth beside the plate. He was not a loud man, and he did not raise his voice now, but there was something in it that made Gerald's grip loosen all the same. "I asked her a question," Jonathan said, "and you didn't let her answer it." He looked at Amelie, then not at the apron or the uniform, but at her face, and the look was steady and without contempt, which was somehow harder to stand than the contempt would have been. "I'd like to hear it. Why do you want the chicken?" The whole corner of the room had gone quiet now. Amelie felt the eyes on her, the diamonds and the candlelight, the manager rigid at her side, and she understood that whatever she said next, there was no version of it that did not cost her something. She could lie. She had gotten good at lying that very morning, but the lie wouldn't come not under that steady gaze, and what came instead was the truth breaking loose all at once. "Because I haven't been paid," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she forced it level again. "Not for 2 weeks. And I'm not the only one. There are people in that kitchen who haven't seen a paycheck in months, and we're all afraid to say it out loud because the last person who did lost her hours." Tears stood in her eyes, but she did not let them fall, because she had decided somewhere in the last 10 seconds that if she was going to lose this job, she would lose it standing up. "I have a brother at home. He's sick and there's no food in the house, and I had to choose this week between his medicine and the rent, and I couldn't pay either one. That chicken was going in the garbage. I just didn't want it to go in the garbage when somebody I love is hungry." The silence that followed was complete. Jonathan Whitmore did not move for what felt like a long time. He was looking at her, but Amelie had the strange sense that he was not only looking at her, that he was looking past her at something in his own memory, some younger version of himself in some older year. Because what nobody at that table knew, what nobody in the bright dining room would have guessed, was that the man in the expensive suit had once carried trays himself. Long before his father's restaurant ever succeeded, When the family still had nothing, Jonathan had bussed tables in a diner 2 states away to keep the lights on at home. He had eaten food off plates he was supposed to be clearing, ashamed, hoping no one would see. He had buried that boy a long time ago beneath decades of success. The girl in front of him had just dug him up with a single sentence, and it had happened here, under his own roof. Beneath the gold letters that spelled out his father's name above the door, the name of a man who had come up from nothing and built this place on the promise that the people inside it would be treated honestly. Whatever fairness Arthur Whitmore had meant to leave behind him had rotted in the dark while his son looked the other way, and now it was standing before him in a borrowed apron with tears it refused to shed. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked quietly. "Amelie," she said. "Amelie Richard." He turned his head slowly toward Gerald, and the warmth that had been in his face when he looked at her was entirely gone from it now. "Don't touch her again," he said. "And don't say another word until I understand exactly what's been happening in my restaurant." Gerald's mouth opened and closed. Around them, the guests had stopped pretending not to listen. And Amelie Richard, who had walked in that evening expecting nothing but another night of swallowing the truth, stood in the middle of the most expensive room she had ever set foot in and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had actually heard her. What she did not know yet was that the woman in the gown had heard her too and was already crossing the floor toward them. Celeste Whitmore crossed the dining room, the way a blade crosses silk without hurry and without a single wasted motion, and the guests turned to watch her come the way they always did. Her gown caught the candlelight, and the diamonds at her throat caught it too. And she arrived at her husband's table wearing the bright, untroubled smile she wore for the room rather than for the people in it. She had built her whole life on the night of this Christmas party, the grandest evening on the restaurant's calendar, and she was not about to let a girl in an apron spoil it. "Darling," she said to Jonathan, laying one cool hand on his sleeve, "whatever is the matter, you've gathered quite an audience." "This young woman tells me she hasn't been paid," Jonathan said. "She tells me others haven't been paid for months. I'd like you to explain that to me." The smile never left Celeste's mouth, but something behind it sharpened. She looked at Amelie, then for the first time looked her up and down from the worn shoes to the trembling hands. And when she spoke again, it was in the gentle, pitying tone of a woman correcting a child. "Oh, sweetheart," she said to Amelie, "is that the story you've decided to tell tonight?" She turned to her husband and to the guests who had drifted closer to listen. "Jonathan, I see exactly what's happening here, even if you don't. Girls like this learn very young how to read a kind face. She saw a wealthy man eating alone, she saw an opening, and she reached for it. It's a talent, really. She found the one thing certain to move you, and she's playing it like a violin." Celeste's voice rose just enough for the nearest tables. "Wages. Sick relatives. It's always the same performance, and it always works because men like my husband would rather open their wallets than feel cruel." The words landed exactly as they were meant to. Amelie felt the temperature of the room change around her, felt the sympathy that had been gathering curdle into doubt, saw a few of the guests exchange the small, knowing looks of people who had just decided they understood the situation. Her face burned. Everything Celeste had said was a lie, and yet it had the awful smoothness of a thing that sounded true, and Amelie had no diamonds and no gown and no smooth voice of her own to set against it. She had only the truth, and she had already spent the truth once tonight, and it had bought her this. But Jonathan was not looking at the guests, and he was not looking at Amelie. He was looking at his wife. He had been married to Celeste for a long time, long enough that he had stopped truly seeing her the way a man stops seeing a painting he passes every morning. He saw her now. He watched the ease with which she made a desperate girl into a con artist in front of a room full of strangers, the practiced flick of cruelty dressed up as concern, and he felt something cold open in his chest because he recognized the performance. It was the same one she gave him at home, the one she had been giving him for years, and he had believed it the same way these strangers were believing it now. "That's enough," he said quietly. Celeste laughed light and disbelieving. "You can't be serious. You're going to take her word over, I said that's enough. What none of them could see was that the damage was already moving past the walls of the restaurant. Celeste did not work alone. She kept a small circle of people whose loyalty she paid for, and before the night was out, one of them had taken a short clip of the scene, Amelie standing flushed and tearful beside the billionaire's table, the manager nearby the whispered word, wages, and set it loose online with a caption that wrote the story for anyone too lazy to ask. The girl in the apron became, in the space of a few hours, a grifter who had been caught trying to shake down one of the wealthiest men in the state, a young woman cynically wielding her hardship and the color of her skin to extort a fortune from a generous family. The clip traveled the way ugliness always travels fast and far, and the comments bloomed beneath it like mold. But long before any of that reached Amelie, the phone in her apron rang again, and the number on the screen was the hospital. Afterwards, she could never remember the exact words the nurse used. She remembered only the shape of them, the way they emptied the floor out from under her. Noah had collapsed. He had been weak all week, weaker than she had let herself admit, because the medicine had been running out, and the appointment she could not pay for had been pushed back, and pushed back again until the gap between what his body needed and what it was getting had grown too wide to cross. He had gone down in the apartment alone, and a neighbor had heard him fall, and now he was in the back of an ambulance and they needed her to come right away. Amelie did not remember crossing the dining room. She remembered being on her feet and the phone slipping in her hand, and a sound coming out of her that she did not recognize as her own. And then Jonathan Whitmore was there, taking her by the shoulders, asking her what had happened, and somewhere behind him, Celeste was saying his name in a tone of warning, and he was not listening to it at all. "My car's out front," he said. "Come on, now." He left his wife standing in the middle of her own party. He left the guests and the candlelight and the whole gleaming machine of the evening, and he walked Amelie out the front door with his hand steady at her back, and he put her in the car and told the driver the name of the hospital, and then told him to hurry. Celeste called after them, once her voice cracking for the first time all night, but the door swung shut on the sound of it. The car moved through the dark and the wet streets, the holiday lights smearing across the windows, and for a while neither of them spoke. Amelie sat with her hands knotted in her lap and tried to breathe. Jonathan watched her, and when he saw that the silence was going to crush her, he spoke gently, more to give her something to hold than because he needed the answer. "You said you wanted the chicken for your brother," he said. "Because there was no food in the house." Amelie nodded. Then she shook her head, and the thing she had kept folded up inside herself all evening, the part she had not been able to say in front of the diamonds, and the crowd came loose in the dark of the car where only one person could hear it. "It wasn't really about the food," she said. Her voice was thin, but it held. "I mean, it was. We don't have any, that's true. But that's not why I asked." She drew a breath. "Today is his birthday. He turned 15 today. And weeks ago, back when I still thought the paychecks were coming, he asked me for one thing. Just one. He wanted the honey-glazed chicken our mother used to make. She had this recipe, she never wrote it down. It was just in her head, and she'd make it on the good nights, and the whole place would smell like brown sugar and butter." Tears were running freely now, and she let them because there was no one left to be strong in front of. "Our mom's been gone 2 years. That chicken is the only thing of hers we've got that doesn't cost a dime to keep. And I promised him I'd make it for his birthday, and then I couldn't because there's nothing in the house and no money to buy anything. And tonight there were 2 perfect pieces sitting on a plate about to be thrown out, and I thought maybe I could bring them home, so that for one day I wouldn't have broken a promise to a sick kid on his birthday." Jonathan Whitmore had heard a great many things in his life. He had sat across from heads of companies and signed away sums that could have changed 1,000 lives, and very little reached him anymore. This reached him. It went straight past everything he had built around himself and found the boy who had once eaten cold food in shame and prayed no one would see. And it broke something open in him that had been sealed for a long time. He looked out the window so she would not see his own eyes, and when he had control of his voice, he turned back to her. "He's going to get his chicken," Jonathan said. "And you're going to get every dollar that's owed to you, every dollar that's owed to all of you. I don't yet know how deep this goes, Amelie, but I am going to find the bottom of it, and I promise you the people who did this are going to answer for it." Whatever softness had carried him through the car ride was gone now, replaced by something harder and quieter. "I built nothing in my life by looking away from what I didn't want to see." I let myself forget that. I'm not going to forget it again. At the hospital, the news was bad, but not the worst. Noah was stable, the doctor told them, but it had been close, far closer than it ever should have come, and the reason was as simple as it was. Damning the boy had missed treatment he could not afford to miss, and his body had finally paid the bill. Amelie listened with Jonathan beside her and understood with a fresh and terrible clarity that her brother had nearly died not because medicine did not exist for him, but because someone had decided her wages were better spent elsewhere. Jonathan stepped into the hallway and made a phone call. The man he called was named Harry Hartley, and Harry had been the Whitmore family's lawyer for 15 years, a careful, unflashy man who answered his phone at any hour because Jonathan had long ago made it worth his while to. Jonathan told him in a low voice what had happened and what he suspected and what he wanted. He wanted to know where the money had gone. He wanted the payroll records, all of them going back as far as they went. And he wanted Harry to start following the money tonight. "Quietly," Jonathan said. "Until we know who we're dealing with, this stays quiet." It did not stay quiet because back at the restaurant, the woman who had everything to lose was already moving. Celeste had watched her husband walk out the front door with the waitress, and she was not a fool. She understood what that meant better than anyone because she understood better than anyone what there was to find. So while the party emptied and the guests went home full of gossip, she found Gerald in the back, and she did not waste words on him. She put a single sheet of paper in front of him and a pen on top of it. It was a notice of termination dated that evening, dismissing Amelie Richard for theft and misconduct, a record that would exist before any investigator came asking a girl already branded a thief before she could be called a victim. Gerald hesitated, and Celeste reminded him in the pleasant voice she used for these things exactly how much he had helped her over the years, exactly how many of her instructions he had carried out without question, and exactly how poorly it would go for him if he suddenly developed a conscience now. He signed it. Then she went to the others. One by one, she found the people of the kitchen, the cooks and the cleaners and the dishwashers who had gone months without their pay, and she made them the kind of promises that are really threats. If anyone spoke to a lawyer, contracts would not be renewed. If anyone gave a statement, certain phone calls would be made to certain offices about certain people's papers. She watched the fear settle over their faces, the same fear that had kept them silent for months, and she trusted it to keep them silent a while longer. But fear was not what was keeping Celeste herself awake. What kept her awake was the money. The wages had not simply gone unpaid, they had gone somewhere. Month after month, the amounts that should have reached the people who earned them had been quietly routed elsewhere into accounts, and through transfers that told their own clear story to anyone who knew how to read a ledger. On paper in the files locked in the office upstairs, the trail was plain, and Harry Hartley, she knew, read ledgers for a living. So that same night after the last guest had gone and the front of the house had gone dark, Celeste climbed the stairs to the office with the intention of making the trail disappear. Amelie came back for the documents because she would not let anyone talk her out of it. Noah was sleeping finally, the machines beside him, keeping their steady time, and there was nothing more for her to do at the hospital but sit in the fear of the dark hours. When Harry called back to say he needed the original payroll files from the office to move quickly, Jonathan had taken the call in the hall, and Amelie had heard enough of it to understand. She was on her feet before he finished. "I'll go," she said. "I know that building better than anybody you could send. I know which drawer, I know the back stairs. I can be in and out before anyone even knows the door opened." Jonathan shook his head. I don't want you anywhere near that place tonight. Not with my wife loose in it. And I can't sit in this chair one more minute while the proof that almost killed my brother sits in an office waiting for somebody to burn it, Amelie said. Every hour those files sit there is an hour she can decide they should stop existing. Please, let me do something instead of just being something this keeps happening to. He looked at her for a long moment and then he gave in because he understood that kind of need better than most. He would finish with the doctor and follow her straight there, he said. She was to call him the moment she was inside. The restaurant was dark when she let herself in through the service door, dark and enormous and strange. Without its crowd, the long dining room full of stacked chairs and the ghosts of the evening. She had not reached the back stairs when a shape detached itself from the shadows near the kitchen, and she stopped short. It was Gerald. He looked nothing like the man who had seized her arm at the Billionaire's table a few hours before. He looked hollowed out. A man standing alone in a dark building with something heavy pressing on him. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no force in it. Amelie looked at him and she found she was not afraid of him anymore. "You signed something tonight," she said. "I can see it on you. She had you sign something." When he didn't answer, she went on quieter. "I hope it was worth it. Because I've watched how people like her work my whole life. When it all comes apart, and it always comes apart, it's never the woman whose name was never on anything who pays for it. It's the manager who signed the papers. It's the one who made the phone calls. You'll be the one in a courtroom and she'll be in a gown 3 rows back, telling everyone she had no idea." She moved past him toward the stairs. "I'd think hard about whose side I wanted to be standing on when the lights come up." She left him standing there in the dark, and she did not look back, and she did not know yet that the words had gone into him like a hook. It was the smell that stopped her on the landing, sharp and wrong smoke, the chemical sweetness of burning paper. The office door stood half open, and light flickered inside it. Amelie eased closer and looked, and there was Celeste, still in her gown, her diamonds thrown carelessly on the desk, feeding folder after folder into a metal waste bin where a small fire chewed at the corners of the pages. Months of records, the whole paper trail of the stolen wages, blackening and curling in the can while the woman who had taken everything stood over it, lit from below, looking nothing at all like the smooth hostess who had charmed a room a few hours before. She looked frightened. She looked like a person trying to outrun a thing that had already caught up with her. Amelie understood watching her that the burning was not power. It was panic. A woman who knew exactly what those papers proved was trying to make them not exist, and the very desperation of it told the whole truth louder than the pages ever could. She did the only thing she could think to do. She lifted her phone, and through the gap in the door, she filmed it. The fire, the gown, the folders going in one after another, Celeste's face caught in the light. Her hand shook, but she held the phone steady enough, and the moment she had it, she sent it to Jonathan and to Harry, both before she let herself think too hard about what would happen next. The little arrows on the screen turned to check marks. Whatever happened now? The things she had seen could no longer be unseen by the only 2 people who mattered. It was reaching for the folder that gave her away. One file had not made it into the bin. It had slid off the edge of the desk and onto the floor near the door fallen open. Pages of names and figures spread across the carpet, and Amelie crouched to gather them almost without deciding to because they were the proof, and the proof was burning and she could not simply leave it. The pages crinkled in her grip. Celeste's head came up at the sound. For a long moment, the 2 of them only looked at each other across the small, flickering room, the girl on the floor with an armful of evidence, and the woman by the fire who had just realized she had been seen. Then Celeste moved fast. She crossed the room and snatched the phone from Amelie's hand, her fingers working at the screen, and Amelie watched her face change as she understood that there was nothing to delete, that the thing was already gone already in 2 inboxes she could not reach. Celeste's composure cracked all the way through then, and what was underneath it was not the polished cruelty of the dining room. It was something rawer and more dangerous. The look of someone with everything to lose and very little left to lose it with. "You stupid girl," Celeste said very low. "You have no idea what you've just done." Amelie got to her feet, the folder clutched against her chest. "I know exactly what I've done," she said. "I've got what you've been stealing right here, and it's already out. You can't burn it now." Celeste looked at the folder in Amelie's arms, and Amelie saw the calculation move behind her eyes, saw her measure the distance to the door and the value of what the girl was holding. She did not raise a hand. She did not need to. She simply stepped back into the hallway and pulled the office door shut between them, and Amelie heard the small final sound of the latch turning the lock that had always been there to keep people out, now keeping her in. "Let's see how brave you are by morning." Celeste's voice came through the door, steadier now, already rebuilding itself into something that could face a lawyer and a husband and the world. "When it's your word against mine. A waitress and a thief with a video everyone will say was faked against a woman this city has known for 20 years. I have money you can't imagine and lawyers you'll never afford, and I will spend every cent of it burying you before I let you ruin me. You'll be the one they charge, sweetheart. Defamation, theft, whatever fits. Sit in there and think about that." Her footsteps moved away down the hall. Amelie stood alone in the dark office with the smoke still rising from the bin and the folder pressed to her chest, locked in her phone, gone the proof of everything in her hands, and no way out of the room. She had done the bravest thing she had ever done, and it had landed her here in the deepest dark of the worst night of her life. And somewhere across the city, her brother slept hooked to machines, and the woman who had nearly killed him was walking away free. She slid down the wall to the floor and held on to the folder and told herself over and over that the message had gone, that somewhere 2 men had seen what she had seen. It was a thin thread to hang a life on. For the moment, it was the only one she had. The thread held. Across the city in a hospital corridor that smelled of disinfectant and cold coffee, Jonathan Whitmore's phone lit up in his hand, and what he saw on the small screen turned his blood to ice. Celeste in the gown he had watched her charm a roomful of guests in only hours before feeding folder after folder into a fire. He watched it once, and then he was moving already, dialing Harry Hartley as he strode toward the elevator, and Harry, who had received the same video at the same moment, was already in his car. They reached the restaurant within minutes of each other. The front of the house was dark, the gold letters above the door catching the last of the holiday lights, and Jonathan went in through the service entrance and took the back stairs 2 at a time. The smell met him on the landing the way it had met her, sharp and wrong, and he followed it to the office door and found it locked. He called her name through the wood, and when her voice came back from the other side, thin and shaking but unmistakably, hers, something in his chest that had been clenched since the hospital let go. The door was old and the lock was older, and between the 2 of them, Jonathan and Harry put their shoulders to it until the frame gave, and the door swung in, and Amelie was on the floor against the far wall with a folder crushed to her chest, and her face streaked with smoke and tears. The waste bin still smoldered. Half the records were ash, but half of them were not, and the half she had saved was clutched against her like the only solid thing in the world. Jonathan crossed the room and crouched in front of her, and for a moment he did not say anything about evidence or lawyers or any of it. He only looked at her, this girl who had walked into a burning room and filmed the truth and gotten herself locked in for it, and he said very quietly, "You're all right. It's over. You did it. You hear me? You did it." Behind him in the doorway, Celeste appeared. She had heard the door break, and she had come back because a woman like Celeste did not flee a room she believed she could still rule. She stood in the hallway light with her composure entirely rebuilt. The gown smoothed the diamonds back at her throat, and she looked at the 3 of them. Her husband crouched on the floor beside a waitress, the family lawyer standing guard. The saved folder in the girl's arms, and she smiled, the cold, bright smile that had ended 100 arguments before they started. "Well," she said, "isn't this a touching little scene?" She let her gaze travel over them without hurry. Go ahead then. Take your video and your half-burned papers to whoever you like. Do you really imagine it will go the way you think? She turned the smile on her husband. Picture it, Jonathan. The story breaks. On one side, a woman this city has known and admired for 20 years, a name on a charity board at every gala. On the other, a waitress nobody's ever heard of. With a grudge and a sob story and a video, any expert can be paid to call a fake. Who do you think the reporters believe? Who do you think the shareholders stand behind? They will choose the woman in the gown over the girl in the apron every single time, because that is how the world is built, and you know it as well as I do. She let that settle, and then she delivered what she believed was the final blow, turning fully to face her husband. So here is your choice, and you'd better make it clearly. You can stand with me and we protect the name your father built and everything that comes with it. Or you can stand with her and watch everything you have burned down around you for the sake of one little nobody and her leftover chicken. Choose carefully. Everything you own is on one side of that line. It was Jonathan understood the truest thing his wife had ever said to him, and the ugliest. She had laid the whole machinery of his life on the table, the name, the money, the comfortable forgetting that had let all of this happen under his roof for months, while he looked the other way. She was offering him the chance to keep looking away, dressed up as loyalty, and he found, standing in that smoke-stained room with a girl's tears drying on her face beside him, that he wanted no part of it. You're right about one thing, Jonathan said. He rose to his full height and faced her. My father built this place. He came up from nothing, and he built it on a promise that the people who worked inside it would be treated fairly, and I let you turn it into something he would have been ashamed of. That's on me. I'll carry that. His voice did not rise, but it filled the room all the same. But you're wrong about the rest. I'm not choosing between the name and the girl. The name was never worth keeping if this is what it costs. I choose the truth, Celeste. I choose her. Celeste's smile flickered, and Harry Hartley stepped forward with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent the last few hours doing exactly what he was paid to do. It won't come down to her word against yours, Mrs. Whitmore, Harry said. It never would have. You've been so worried about the papers in that bin that you seem to have forgotten the papers don't matter much anymore. He held up his own phone. Money leaves a trail whether you burn the folders or not. The wages that should have gone to 19 employees over the past several months didn't simply vanish. They were moved, routed out in small, careful amounts through accounts that all lead back to the same place. Your husband called me from the hospital tonight, and I've been following it ever since, and it isn't hard to follow. Nearly $700,000, Mrs. Whitmore, taken from people who were choosing between medicine and rent. And the folder in this young woman's arms matches the transfers line for line, the same names, the same amounts. The proof that what I found in the accounts is exactly what you took from the payroll. Every dollar of it went to cover debts you've been hiding for a very long time. Gambling debts, the kind that don't forgive and don't wait. The blood went out of Celeste's face. That's a lie, she said, but the steadiness had gone from her voice. It isn't, said a new voice from the hallway, and we both know it. Gerald stood there. He had been somewhere in the dark of the building since Amelie left him by the kitchen, and he had heard enough, and now he came into the light looking like a man who had finally done the arithmetic of his own future and not like the sum. The thing the girl had said to him on her way to the stairs had not let him go, that when it all came apart it was the man who signed the papers who went to prison, not the woman whose name was never on anything. He had signed her termination notice. He had made the threatening phone calls. His name, not Celeste's, was on the worst of it, and the thought of answering for all of it alone while she walked free behind her lawyers had finally been more than his loyalty was worth. I kept everything, Gerald said to Jonathan, not to Celeste. Every email, every instruction she ever sent me about whose pay to hold and what to tell them and who to threaten. I kept it because I'm not a stupid man, and I always knew this night might come. He held up a thin stack of printed pages. It's all here. And it's already with my own lawyer. I'm not going down for her." Celeste looked from the lawyer to the manager to her husband, and for the first time all evening there was nothing behind her eyes but the plain understanding of a person who has run out of room. The video. The records Harry had already traced. The folder in Amelie's arms. The emails in Gerald's hand. Every exit she had counted on was closed, and she had closed most of them herself with her own panic, feeding the fire that proved better than any witness that she had known precisely what she was destroying. "Jonathan," she began, and the new note in her voice was one he had never heard from her, the small, high sound of pleading. "Harry," Jonathan said without taking his eyes off his wife. "Call the police. Now." He drew a breath, and what he said next he said evenly, almost gently, which made it worse. "Celeste, you're done at this restaurant. You're done at every company with my father's name on it. The lawyers will handle the rest of it, and the police will handle their part, and you will answer for what you took from those people." His jaw tightened. "And you should know that I'll be filing for divorce in the morning. I should have seen what you were a long time ago. I'm grateful to the girl who finally made me look." There was nothing left for Celeste to say, and for once in her life she said nothing. When the officers arrived a short while later, she went with them in her gown and her diamonds, past the stacked chairs of the dark dining room, and out under the gold letters of the name she had spent so long trading on, and that was the last the restaurant ever saw of her as anything but a story people told. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan made good on every word. The 19 people of the kitchen received not only the wages that had been stolen from them, but a sum on top of it, an apology, made in the only language that truly repairs such things, paid out personally and without conditions. The cooks and the cleaners and the dishwashers who had gone months in fear were called in one by one, not to be threatened this time, but to be made whole, and several of them wept in the office, where they had once only been afraid. Gerald was let go, though his cooperation kept him out of the worst of what might have come for him. The law took its own slower course with Celeste, and the matter of nearly $700,000 and where it had gone became a thing for courtrooms. And Noah got his transplant. He had been far down the list, but stability and proper care moved him into a place where, when a match came, his body was ready to receive it. Jonathan saw to the costs without being asked, quietly, the way his father might have, and Amelie sat in a different hospital corridor a few weeks later, this one bright with afternoon light instead of dark with fear, and watched the color come slowly back into her brother's face. She held his hand while he slept, and for the first time in 2 years, she did not feel the floor waiting to open beneath her. The restaurant did not keep its old name. Jonathan had the gold letters taken down from above the door, and in their place he put up new ones, simpler, that read, "The Open Table." It was not only a name. He rebuilt the place from the kitchen, outset the wages right, and made them public, put the people who did the work at the center of how the thing was run, so that what had happened in the dark could never happen there again. His father, he thought, would have understood. It was the promise the old man had started with, dug back up out of the ash and planted again where it could grow. A year after the night of the fire, Amelie Richard walked back through the front door of the Open Table. She was not the girl who had once stood trembling beside a billionaire's table in a borrowed apron. She came in wearing a simple, elegant dress that fit her well, her shoulders straight. The fear that had ridden her for so long finally set down somewhere behind her. She was a student now, the first year of a degree in social work nearly behind her, near the top of her class, carried there by a scholarship Jonathan had set up in his father's name for young people who had been failed the way she had nearly been failed. She meant to spend her life on the people the world locked in dark rooms and walked away from, because she knew exactly what that room felt like from the inside, and she knew what it meant when someone broke down the door. Jonathan was at his usual corner table. He rose when he saw her the way he would have risen for anyone he respected, and his face, when he recognized her, was the face of a man watching something turn out right for once. She had asked the kitchen ahead of time for the use of the stove. What she carried out to him on a clean white plate were 2 pieces of honey-glazed chicken, hot, from the pan glazed gold, the smell of brown sugar and butter rising off them and filling the bright room. It was her mother's recipe, the one that had never been written down, the one that lived only in her memory and in her brother's, made by her own hands at last on a day when there was food in the house and a promise long since kept. She set the plate down in front of Jonathan Whitmore. "A year ago I stood right about there," she said, "and I asked you for the chicken you didn't finish because I had nothing, and I was ashamed, and I thought asking was the lowest thing I'd ever have to do." Her eyes were bright, but she was smiling. "I'm not asking for anything today. I came to bring you this, because the night you held that plate still and asked me one question instead of letting them throw me out, you didn't just save a job or my brother or me. You looked at somebody everyone else had decided not to see. So this is the chicken finally made the way it was always supposed to be made, and it's a gift this time. Not a favor. A gift." Jonathan looked down at the plate and then at the young woman standing in front of him, steady and unafraid. In the light of the room he had rebuilt, and the boy who had once eaten cold food in shame, and the man who had nearly let it all happen under his own roof, and his father's promise dug back up out of the ash all met in him at once, and for a moment he could not speak at all. "Thank you, Amelie," he managed finally. "Sit with me. Tell me about your brother." And she did. The two of them sat together at the open table in the warm and honest room, while the smell of her mother's recipe filled the place where a year before a girl had asked for the smallest thing in the world and been heard. The truth had been small, and the money had been vast, and the truth had won anyway. It did not always. But that day in that room, it had. You know, the part of this story that stays with me isn't the fire or the courtroom or even the moment everything came apart for the woman in the gown. It's the question. One man chose to ask why instead of looking away, and that single question changed the course of two lives. So I want to ask you something before you go. When you watched Amelie standing there with that plate in her hands, what did you feel? Did it remind you of a moment in your own life when you were the one who needed help and were too ashamed to ask? Or maybe the one who almost walked past someone who needed you? I'd really love to hear it. If you've ever lived through something like this, a time someone saw you when no one else did, or a time you were the one who chose to look, tell me about it down in the comments. I read them, and the truth is that the most powerful stories I get to tell are the ones that started as a few honest sentences from someone like you. Your story might just become the next one we share here. And if Amelie's journey moved you tonight, stay with me a little longer. There are more of these to come.